Hello, my name is Joe Hoyle, and I want to welcome you to this session of the Virginia Society of CPAs Accounting Educators Virtual Exchange. And I'm going to be speaking with you for about 50 minutes, and I want to talk about online education, what worked for me, what you might be able to use in your own class. I believe that high quality online education is something we all need quite a bit. Now, I'm a big fan of live education, but live education has some real drawbacks. It is limited to the number of students you can put in a room. High quality online education has virtually no limitations. So I simply want to show you some of the stuff that I did in one of my classes, and hopefully that will help you think about what you might do in your own classes to make them work better, or maybe to actually extend and try some online education yourself. So let's get started. Let's talk about what we're going to do here in this presentation. As I indicated, I am Joe Hoyle. I'm an associate professor of accounting. I'm also an accounting teaching fellow at the Robbins School of Business at the University of Richmond, which is about 8 miles from where I'm sitting right at this very moment. Glad to be with you. I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to show you some stuff that you have never seen before. And so maybe that will encourage you to think of ways that you can apply some of this stuff to your own teaching. Whenever I speak, I always like to bring up my blog. The title of my blog is Teaching, Getting the Most from Your Students. Now, you can find this blog by simply going to Google and searching for Joe Hoyle Teaching Blog, and you'll go right to it. Now, over the past few years, I have written, believe it or not, 314 essays on teaching. Now, when I began, I thought you could write 10 or 15 essays about teaching. I have literally written 314 essays on teaching, on every aspect of teaching I could think about. And so if there's something you're interested in reading about, there is an index on the side of the blog. Look at the various topics I have covered. Go and see what you can find out. I am certainly opinionated when it comes to teaching. Now, people often ask me, do people really read your blog? Well, as of yesterday, we had 652,427 page views. So clearly, people do read it. And I'd like to add you to that list. I'd like to add you to the list of the people who read that blog and hopefully maybe use it to improve your teaching. So now I'm going to tell you a lot of things. It will not surprise me if you have questions. Please feel free to contact me at jhoyle@richmond.edu, and I'll be glad to talk with you by email if you are interested, or I'll be glad to set up a Zoom session if you want to chat in more detail. Please feel free to contact me and I'll be glad to talk. I didn't sign up to do this presentation because I didn't want to talk about online education. I clearly do. If you're interested in the slides, please send me a note and I'll send you the slides that you can see there, because I want you to think about how this may apply to your teaching and make your teaching better. Before I get into this, I want to issue a challenge to every person who hears me. Now, that what I often will do is if I talk about some of the stuff, people will go, well, I can't do that, or I'll need to get one of the textbook publishers to do that for me. Everything that I talk about in this presentation, and I mean absolutely everything in this presentation, I made alone by hand. I sat at this computer I'm sitting at, and I did them by myself. And I'm in my mid-70s. So this is not a person who's 35 years old producing materials. I'm in my mid-70s and I produced it all. If I can do it at my advanced elderly age, you can do it too. I think that's one of the things that you have to believe in. You have to believe in yourself. I can do this. If you start out with the idea, well, I can't do this, then obviously you can't. But if you have faith in yourself and if you believe you can accomplish it, you can do it. So my challenge is, I did it, you can do it. Make it happen. Okay, I want you to ponder a question for me. I don't need for you to answer the question. I just need for you to think about it. And I need for you to think about it right away. And that is, if we take most students, let's say we pick a random sample of 500 students, is online education somewhat inferior to live learning? And the reason I bring this up is, ever since I taught this class online, I have talked to people about online education. I've talked to college presidents, I've talked to business school deans, I have talked to faculty, I have talked to a whole bunch of people. And when you bring up high quality online education, their eyes begin to glaze over. You can just see it. And I think the reason is that there is an idea that online education is really inferior education, that the way that God meant for it to be was for a person to stand in front of a room and for a person to give the information. I think that's wonderful, but boy, does that have some limitations. So the question is, can high quality online education be produced? And if so, can it be used to teach not 50 people a semester or 75 people a semester, but 10 or 20,000 a semester? This world needs more high quality education. And I personally believe that that's going to be online education, but not bad online education. I mean, high quality education. Can that be produced? That's what I want you to think about. I think it can be, but if you're going to think about it, you have to be convinced that it will work, that it can be done. So in my own classes, I always like to give history lessons. Here's how we got to this point. If we're doing some topic, we'll talk about how we got to this point. So how did I get to this point? So I kind of have a biblical reference here in the beginning. So if you go back to 1981, I needed some way to supplement my income. So I started a live CPA review course here in Richmond. And I was fortunate. And within 5 or 10 years, I was having about 300 people in an auditorium every Saturday. And I would stand up in front of them for 6 hours and I would talk as fast as I possibly could. And I would get that information, I hope, into their heads so they could pass the CPA exam. This clearly was live education. A person with a whiteboard and a magic marker for 6 hours. Did it work? I think it worked fairly well, but it was certainly a tough way to teach. In about 1994, I got bored and decided to do something different. I kept the live course, but I added Hoyle CPA Success, and that was a distance learning program, and that was not live. Now, I want to make sure you understand this was 1994. This would not have been called an online education because we didn't have online education. This was distance learning. So we would have a box and we would add into it various teaching materials and we would seal it up and we would give it to UPS, and UPS would take it to the candidates and they would open the box and they would follow our instructions and hopefully they would pass the CPA exam. There was no live person at all. It was just a box of goodies, and those goodies were distance learning materials. Now, we called that program, in fact, my wife named the program 90 Days to Success. And so the first thing the person would get would be a calendar, and it would say on day 1, do this, on day 2, do this, on day 3, do this. This was simplistic stuff. Just here's day 3, here's what you should do. In 4 to 5 years, without any real serious advertising, how would you advertise in 1994 a CPA review course in Richmond, Virginia? We were selling this distance learning material in all 50 states and in 35 foreign countries. I was sending material to Egypt. I was sending material to Spain. I was sending material to India. I was sending material to Korea and Japan. We were sending material across the planet, and we were not advertising. We would always ask the people, if you like this material, can you tell your friends? If you think this material works, can you tell your friends? And almost immediately we were selling across the country, across the world. There were really just 3 of us. It was myself and Steve and Seeley. These were the 3 people that created this course. And we actually ran it all out of Seeley's garage. we were teaching people how to pass a CPA exam. And we were helping literally thousands of people that we never, ever met. I always found this fascinating. Now, eventually the exam became computerized and I sold the course just for reasons that I was getting really overworked as much as anything else. But for about 10 years, we were just selling materials everywhere. Now, even with that, what I would call ancient technology, I learned so much about creating relatively cheap online materials. And this is what I was trying to do. I was trying to make sure that people could pass the CPA exam without having to spend an arm and a leg in this case. I wanted people to be able to pass the exam. So we were using these distance learning materials, and I just learned so much. Even if it wasn't a success, I just love the fact that we tried to do it and we tried to figure out how to make it work. I always wanted to try it in college. I always wanted to see, could I do the same thing in college for a financial accounting course that we were doing across the planet with CPA review. And CPA review, you were doing financial accounting, you were doing auditing, you were doing business law, you were doing income taxes, you were doing all kinds of stuff through just distance learning. So we had all this, but I work at a small, private, high quality university that really isn't into distance learning. That wasn't our goal. That wasn't what we were intended to do. So even though I found this fascinating, it really wasn't what anyone at the University of Richmond expected to do. So I effectively took this knowledge and I kind of stuck it in my head back in about 1999. And here's what I learned back in 1999. I want to show you 10 things that I learned from that experience so many years ago, because they have affected how I teach even today. But they were designed for distance learning. So what we want to do is to think about those 10 things and see what they told us. In some ways, the very most important thing was the very first thing. I did not try to go from live to distance learning. When you talk to people about online education, they will say, I have a live course and I try to change it or morph it or evolve it into online education. I think that's a mistake. I think they're two different things. If I was going to make a cake and I was going to make a hamburger for supper, they're both cooking and they both use stoves, but you approach them two different ways. I think live education and distance education are two different things. So one of the things I would strongly suggest is you view them as parallel. On one way, you have live education, and another way you have online education. Now, clearly, there are connections between the two. There are things that you do the same way. But from the basics, they have a different approach to education. So if you're interested in online education, try not to think too hard about what works in live education. I think that is a mistake. Online is online. Live is live. They're two different things. Some overlap, but they're two different things. Number two, always tell the students exactly what they need to do each day, but keep it reasonable. Now, remember what we did in CPA review, 90 days to success. Day one, do this. Day two, do this. Now, when we said do this, we did a lot of thinking about what this would be. What can you do in that day that makes sense, that is a reasonable amount? So we always started in 90 days to success with what are you going to do on day one? And is it a reasonable amount that we could expect a person to actually do? I think that's a clue to being successful in this kind of an educational environment. Number three, we always provided them with an opportunity to catch up. These are human beings. No matter how well it's scheduled out, these are human beings. It's easy to fall back. So we always gave them every so often a day off. And we told them that on those days off, they could rest, they could relax, they could talk to their family, they could take their family out to dinner, or if need be, they could catch up. We wanted them to have that opportunity to catch up so they would not get too far behind. We built that in to the program. Number 4, don't waste people's time. It's easy to assign stuff for no good reason. No matter where you're teaching or how you're teaching, go through your materials, go through your assignments, and ask yourself, where are you wasting the student's time? My bet is that you can find 10 or 20% of the stuff that you do is really a waste of time. It's redundant. It covers something you're covering some other way. If you're going to cover it, make it optional. If you're going to cover something you cover some other way, make this optional, don't make it required. But be very careful, because students resent spending time where there's clearly no good benefit. So look at the stuff you're doing and be very careful about not wasting people's time. Number 5, and this I think is so important. You have to add a bit of urgency. Now, in the CPA exam, that was pretty easy. The CPA exam did that. People are human. They procrastinate. They will put off whatever they can put off. So anytime you're dealing with human beings, especially students, try to put some urgency in it. In the CPA exam, we would say it's 22 days till you take the CPA exam. It's 15 days till you take the CPA exam. It's 13 days till you take the CPA exam. We put in that urgency. When I did online education, we did the same thing. We made really strong attempt to add a little bit of urgency. Now, I understand that the world is full of stress. There is a fine line between giving some urgency and being too stressful. We really try to walk that line carefully. Don't overstress your students, because that's just counterproductive, but do put in a little urgency. And I think the students will do better if you do that. Number 6. Now, in my mind, this is the most important slide in the whole thing. I think this is really a key to education. And if you can do this, if you can figure out some way to do this, this will help you. Number 6, we assign readings to students all the time. Here's a textbook, here's an article, here's something we need for you to read, and so on. Students are never going to do a good job reading an assignment. It's too complicated, it's too long, it's too difficult. So give lots of help anytime you do some readings. And in a few minutes, I'm going to show what I did in the online course. But this is something I have carried over to the live course, that idea of how can I help the students read and understand the material? I co-author 2 textbooks, an advanced accounting textbook and a financial accounting textbook. I realize, and I believe I write extremely well, but students need help. Everything is complicated to them. They need help. If you don't do this, they start out confused. They start out without the good foundation. If you want one way, and I believe this with all my heart, if you want one way to improve your teaching, help them read the material so that they walk into class with a more solid foundation. In addition, and the reason I put these stars here is I just want to say this is important stuff. I believe, for the most part, that virtually all learning is done sequentially. Here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3. Now, once you've learned stuff, then you can start moving it around and you can make it more random. But at the core, the learning process tends to be sequential because we think that way. If you read a sentence, it is sequential, word after word after word. If you read a paragraph, it is sequential, sentence after sentence after sentence. So when you're presenting material, that idea of putting it into some kind of a logical sequence, I think is so important. Hook these 2 things together, guide their reading, and then present the material sequentially. And I believe that you'll be amazed by how much that improves the educational quality of your class. The students will just get smarter, and you'll be amazed how much smarter your students are at that time. Number 8, it's always a good idea to give students a way to review and practice. They will walk out of class thinking they know stuff. They need to be able to review. They need to be able to practice. So what I used to do in CPA review was I would suggest the students would buy a pack of 3x5 cards. And I would tell them, okay, on the back of that 3x5 card or the front, write a question. Some kind of a basic question that you might not remember or you might not figure out. Something that is a key item. And then simply on the back, write the answer and keep it as simple as possible. You don't want this to be, you're not William Shakespeare. You want this to be simple. Write a simple question and a simple answer. And then carry those cards around with you wherever you go. And if you have an extra minute, if you're waiting for lunch, if you're sitting at the bus stop, if you're waiting for a class to begin, take out the cards, read a question, turn it over, read the answer. And what you're doing is you're reviewing and practicing it. If you don't give students a way to review and practice, they will forget the material immediately. You've got to avoid that. You've got to give them a way to keep that knowledge in their heads. And the 3x5 cards really work quite well. Just carry them around, read the question, read the answer. Students love to multitask. Have them be walking across campus, reading questions and answers. That's a student type of thing, multitasking. You can do that. Number 9, I think we miss this in college education. I understand that many students learn better visually, but there's a lot of students who learn quite well by hearing. And I always ask this question: if you watch students walk around, how many of them are wearing earbuds? They have them stuck in their ears all the time. How many times are they listening to podcasts? I think we've missed something by not recognizing how important the ears have become as entryways of information into students' brains. Those earbuds are always there. But how many educational things do you do that will help the students hear the learning, to use those ears? Those ears have gotten well trained over the last 20 years to take in information. I believe that you'll find both in online courses and live courses that learning to use the ears is one way that a lot of students who might otherwise struggle will all of a sudden do a better job because they're learning in a different way, one that has not been well utilized in the past. And finally, in my 10 things, help them believe in themselves. It's not your goal to tear people down. It's your goal to make them believe that they can be successful. You should keep that in mind. If you want to be a great teacher, it starts by convincing students that they can be great students. I constantly tell students, you can do this. I know it's going to take time. I know it will take work. I'm not trying to make it sound easy, but you can do this. That's a theme that plays out very well in distance learning. Just follow what I tell you and you can do this. Follow what I tell you and you can be successful. Now, I learned these 10 things. They've been stored in my brain from 2 decades ago when I started Hoyle CPA Success. Now, of course, obviously, I use a lot of this in my live education, but this was stuff that I learned purely and simply in distance learning. And I've not used it in 2 decades. And then something important happened. Well, lots of important things happened, obviously. In May of 2020, right at the start of COVID, you may remember it was March of 2020, it really began terribly. I volunteered to defer a sabbatical I had and teach 3 sections of our intro level financial accounting course. What happened was that once COVID hit, one of our professors retired. And so we had 3 open sessions in financial accounting that were not covered. And so I offered to switch my sabbatical. I couldn't go anywhere. We were locked down because of the pandemic, and teach those 3 classes. But I only agreed if I could do it using online education. And I wanted to see if I could do what I had done 20 years ago with CPA Review. This fascinated me. Now, I will tell you the truth. The University of Richmond is a small, high quality institution. They would not let me do it purely online. They simply said that was not their operating style. So we were required to have a 75-minute lab each week. Joyce Vanderlyn Smith of our faculty agreed to come in for each class and teach the 75-minute per week review. And it basically, we called it a lab. And Joyce might tell you a little bit differently than I would tell you, but it seemed to me that the role of that lab was to help students review the material that had confused them. It gave them a chance to get some help on that confusion. Personally, I would have loved to try this purely online. The university said no, so we added the lab. Was it helpful? Oh, yes, I think it was helpful, but I don't think it was necessary, to tell you the truth. Okay. So what I then did was I spent that entire summer, again, we were in lockdown, so I just stayed here at the house and did it, to figure out what might actually work for an online course. I never once said, here's the live class, I'm going to switch this to online. I tried to rethink it from the beginning. Now, one thing you need to understand, I have no experience in online education other than the distance learning I did in CPA review back 20, 25 years ago. I had no online experience. And in fact, I had never opened Blackboard. Now, you may have Canvas or you may have some other learning management system. We have Blackboard. And we have Blackboard and it's good. I had never once opened it. I did not know how to open it. I had no idea. I am not a technology person. Heck, you can look at these slides and realize that I'm not a technology person. Any other presenter would have slides that look like they were made in 2022 by somebody who knew what they're doing. My slides look like they were made in 1891 by somebody who had no idea what they were doing. I'm not a technology person, but I am an educator. So my goal was to think about this problem, online education, from an educator's perspective, and then bring in the technology people to help me figure out what to do. I was lucky. I had plenty of help from the technology people, but I did the education part first because I didn't know anything about the technology, to tell you the truth. When I tell people I'd never opened Blackboard before this, they always say, where were you living in a cave? Oh, kind of, I guess. So what I want to do is to show you what I did and how you might carry some of this over to your own classes. But I've got a warning. Did the class work? I used to go, or still do go, to the AAA meetings. And in the AAA meetings, you'll have somebody stand up from some great university and talk about how wonderful something is. And I always want to jump up and raise my hand and say, well, that sounds good. Do you have any real proof it worked? Because I don't want to take teaching advice from someone unless I know that it actually worked. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect. Nothing is perfect. Absolutely nothing is perfect. But it has to work a little bit or it's bad advice. So before I go any further, I want to talk about, did this work? Because if it didn't, this presentation is going to come to a quick stop because you shouldn't hear this. So here's the kind of information I can provide, and you can take this any way you want to. In August of 2020, we had 74 people begin, 74 students. These were almost universally sophomores. They had never had accounting before. They knew nothing about accounting. They were sophomores at the University of Richmond. We finished with 74 students. This I find amazing. I thought when we started, and I told these young people that I was going to do this purely by online education and they were never going to meet me, that they would drop the course like, rats leaving a sinking ship. They all stuck it out. I never had a single student ever come to me or by email and say, I'm thinking about dropping the class. We started with 74 and we ended with 74. That alone fascinates me. They were okay with this. Now, I have two questions for my student evaluations, and these are the two questions, at least on our evaluations, that I think are the most important. If you read my blog, you know I'm big into critical thinking. I think that's what the purpose of a college education should be. So if you went to the student evaluations, and about 75% of the students filled out the evaluations. If you went to the student evaluations, one of the questions was, one of the things to evaluate, the course required you to think critically. Now, this was simply a debit and credit class. We were doing FIFO and LIFO and bad debt expense and cash flows and so on. In that semester, for the average number was 4.672 out of a 5.0 scale. The average for the entire business school at the Robbins School of Business was 4.25. So you can judge that any way you want to, but it was clearly above the school's average, and they never saw a teacher. This was purely done online. The second thing I always think is important, they have to believe they learned something. If they didn't believe they learned anything, this class isn't much good. So the evaluation question is, the course significantly increased your knowledge of the subject. And the students in this class, the 75% or so that filled out the evaluations, the average mark was 4.629 on a 5.0 scale. The average for the business school was 4.32. And again, you can see it's above the average. Now, whether you say that's way above the average or slightly above the average, I'll leave that up to you. But I don't think, or I do think this shows that the class worked pretty well. So I feel comfortable that the class worked well enough that we can get some lessons from it. You may not want to do everything, and probably shouldn't do everything, but you can learn from this. You can learn from how we had this class set up. I do want to stress this one thing, because you hear a lot of things about online. This was online. I never met, neither live nor on Zoom, 69 of the 74 students. There were 5 students who, for one reason or another, Zoomed with me about something that was going on. But the other 69, I would not know if they walked into this room right now. I would not know if they bumped into me in the library. This was very much like, here's a box, here's the material, give it to UPS. Now, obviously, we didn't do that. We did it online, but there was very little different than that. We sent it out to them and we said, here you go. If we've designed this well enough, then you should be able to take it and run with it, and you should be able to get a good, high quality education. So at that point, I want you to ponder a second question. Now, remember, the first question was, is it high quality? Can you have high quality online education? Because if you don't believe that, then there's not much reason to follow this presentation. Secondly, if one person, me in this case, can teach 74 students online, can that same person teach 5,000 students online? To me, that is one of the most important questions in college education today. We desperately need to teach more people and teach them well. Live education is only to teach 25 or 50 or 75 students at a time. Online education can teach thousands, but it only makes sense if it's high quality. So when I showed you those statistics, that's pretty good. Can I do that for 5,000 students? That to me is worth pondering. I pondered that a lot. If I was not 74, if I was 54 or 44, I'd go for that in a heartbeat. I'd love to see if I could do that. Can I teach 5,000 or 10,000 students basic financial statements doing online without ever seeing them? To me, that would just be the challenge of a lifetime. I would love to do that, to tell you the truth. Okay, so here's what the course looked like. I'm going to give you some of the ways that I did it. Some of this might apply to you. First thing is, I'm a big believer in clear communications. You've got to be able to communicate with the students. So therefore, before the semester started, probably in August, I emailed my students several times in that month because I wanted them to know what we were going to do. I would say, I do not want this to be a surprise to you. Here's the way the class operates. I told them why we were doing it this way. There's a pandemic. You can't, live classes are going to be very difficult. This will work. And then thirdly, why they were going to be successful. And what I promised them is, if you will do what I ask you to do, and you'll do it with the best of your ability, I promise you that you can be successful in this course. Now, I never defined success exactly, but I wanted them to be successful. And I guess if I had asked what success was, making an A or a B would have been success to me. But I wanted them to believe, I wanted them to know what we were doing, why they were doing it, and that I was going to help them to be successful, that they were going to learn this material, they were going to do well. And that so I had to have them convinced before they walked in on the first day that this was going to work. And I used the term walked in, obviously an online course. That's not walking in. So that's the first part of online clear communication. I also emailed the students once the semester started. I emailed the students once each and every day, at least once. Sometimes I emailed them 2 or 3 times, but I emailed them at 6:30 every morning, or I emailed them the night before and timed it for 6:30 and said, okay, today is Tuesday. Today is October the 7th. Here's what I need for you to do today. This is what I need for you to do today. Remember 90 days to success on the CPA exam? Same thing. Instead of having a calendar, I just wrote them and said, okay, today's Tuesday. Here's what I need for you to do. And I kept it into manageable chunks. I never gave them anything that I thought would overwhelm them. I just said, this is what I think will work for you. Do it and you'll be fine in that case. I really tried to give them good guidance. Here's what you need to do. Do it, then get on with something else. And I really tried to be encouraging. I wanted them to believe, and I believed that if they would do that, they could do fine in the course. And that was kind of a constant thing. Here's what I want you to do. You can do it. You're going to be successful. And I could do that through emails and some other stuff we did. You're going to do well. You must read my emails. I had to make them believe that emails were to be read, because that was the only way I really had to communicate with them, was through email. So they had to read the emails. And I told them that from the very first day. Now, step 2A, I tried to provide them with a reasonable workload. So I told them, listen, you're going through a pandemic, you're locked down, you can't go very much, you can't leave the campus. I want you to spend 45 to 60 minutes a day. Now, that's not a terrible amount. There's 24 hours in most days. All I want is 45 to 60 minutes each day, but I need it each day. And once you get to 60 minutes, if you want to quit, quit. But you have to do it 7 days per week. There is a pandemic. So schedule out. Do you want to do it 2 in the afternoon? Do you want to do it 10 in the morning? Do you want to do it 11 o'clock at night? I don't care. But I need that 45 to 60 minutes. I preach that over and over. It's not 5 hours a day. It's 45 to 60 minutes. That's the minimum I want. If you do that, I think you've got a great chance to do well in the course. I tried to beat that into their heads to let them know how much I expected of them. So I thought this was interesting. So our student evaluations here at the University of Richmond asked the students to estimate how much time they spend on a course, including the time they spend in class. So I've only asked them for 60 minutes a week. Well, that's 7 hours a week. So we asked the students how much time they spent. 29% said they spent less than 10 hours per week. 71% of those students said they spent more than 10 hours per week. Now, I know there was a pandemic and they didn't have much else to do, but I was only asking for 7 hours. 71% believe they gave me, and some of them put, 12, 15 hours a week. Why? A lot of people will tell you that students do whatever that live teacher tells them to do. There was no live teacher, not standing in front of them. I believe, and we could have a wonderful discussion about this. I believe that the material was interesting and it was well created, and they believed that it was worth learning and they didn't mind putting a little time into it. Students will work if you give them some guidance and some encouragement. I'll have to repeat that. Students will work if you give them some guidance and encouragement. I think that's important to know. Now, at the end, 88% made an A or a B. That's higher than I would normally give, to tell you the truth. But if I had 71% studying more than 10 hours a week, and if the materials were good, shouldn't that give you a pretty high grade? It really is the problem of most education that the students don't do the work. But if you give them the guidance and the encouragement and show them what to do and why, and they do it, then what I would hope is that you'd get a lot of high grades. I still worry about the 88%. That's, for me, that's high. If you've been in my class, you know that's high. But that's a lot of work. And they really did a wonderful job. So I was happy for them. I thought they deserved good grades because I thought they worked for those good grades. Finally, step 2B, they needed to know what to do. Again, we're back to 90 days to success. So what I did was at the beginning of each week, I provide a weekly schedule. Here's Monday, here's Tuesday, here's Wednesday, here's Thursday, here's Friday, here's Saturday, here's Sunday, blah, blah, blah. Here's what you need to do. But then when I wrote them every day, I said, okay, it is Tuesday. Here's what you need to do. I wanted them to be able to see ahead what they were doing. So if it was Tuesday, they knew what they were supposed to do on Friday, for example. But I also wanted them to know on Tuesday, listen, guys, it's Tuesday. Here's what we're talking about FIFO. Here's what I need you to know. We're talking about straight line depreciation. Here's what I need you to know. I wanted them to know each day. I didn't want there to be any guesswork on what they were to be doing on that day. Okay, let's get serious. Step 3, I gave them guided readings. And I said this earlier, I don't believe students do a good job reading materials, textbooks, whatever. That's just not what they're good at. So what I created, and this took a while, and I used PowerPoint just because they knew they had PowerPoint. I created a series of suggestions, we'll say, of what to do when they read the chapters. So for example, I never told them, read chapter 4. I would tell them, do slides 24 through 38. And of course, 24 through 38 would tell them what to read. But it would also give them guidance in how to make this reading. If you simply take one thing from this presentation, this is a good thing to take. I think this helps education. So for example, remember they're on a PowerPoint slide. Slide 24 might say, read the first section of chapter 7, the section only 4 pages. I want to stress, I'm only giving assignments that are a reasonable length, discusses the reporting of accounts receivable on a company's balance sheet. And then I start pointing at what's important. Assume Jones reports 733,976. What does that mean? What does the figure represent? How did they get that balance? I'm trying to draw their attention to the things that I found to be important. So that slide says, number 24, you read those 4 pages. Did you notice what does the 733, 946, and 976 mean? And how do they get that number? I want them to think about what they're reading. I don't want them just to read. I want them to think about what they're reading. Then they would go to slide number 25, and I would ask them a question. I'll say, okay, let me help you. Let me make sure you've got this. Where are accounts receivable presented on a set of financial statements? I think it's a reasonable question for a sophomore. And then I gave them the answer. I'm drawing their attention to what I want them to get from that reading. That to me is very important, that idea of pointing them at the reading so they'll know what they're supposed to be seeing at that time. Then this is slide number 26, go to the test yourself question. This particular textbook has test yourself questions, and look at the Hawthorne Company operates a local hardware store problem. I want them to read that question because it has the question and the answer. And I want them to think about that. I don't want them just to read the pages. I want them to think about that question because that question is something we could then use to build on. That creates the foundation of knowledge that I want to build on in this question, in this case. If you go to question number, PowerPoint number 27, I like to say, listen, here's table number 7.8. Did you see table 7.8? That's important. Look at that table. Don't spend long, but look at that table. It talks about sales. It talks about bad debt expense. It talks about accounts receivable. It talks about the allowance for doubtful accounts. Look at that table. Spend 2 or 3 minutes, 4 or 5 minutes, and that will help you to understand this material. And then finally, here's slide 28. And I use my own textbook in here. So I have some videos buried in the textbook. So I say, okay, at the end of the chapter, you'll find 2 videos. The first concerns your roommate. I want to make it like a real life situation. Your roommate's an English major. Parents own a chain of ice cream shops. The parents start making sales to a local restaurant on credit. The roommate wonders how they're going to report because that gives uncertainty. I love the way this puts the student in the role of the teacher. The student is put into the role to teach the roommate, the English major, about how accounts receivable are reported. It puts the students in the role of the expert. And I think even as sophomores or first-year students, putting students into the role of teacher or expert is something that makes them feel good about themselves. And once they have to think about how they would explain this, I think that's just great educational technology. But all of this comes from those guided readings. So they're going to have to spend some time, but it's only 4 pages. But in those 4 pages, I want to make sure they see what they need to see to form the foundation for our coverage. If you don't do anything else, you might want to try that. I just think that's a wonderful suggestion. Step 4. Now, I've already mentioned the importance of sequential learning. I think that students, humans, just learn most things sequentially. So I think at the very opening, the idea of putting this into a sequential form is just terribly important. So I provided a list of 10 to 15 carefully sequenced questions, and there was usually 2 or 3 per chapter. So I would have question, 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 question. Now they've already done the readings. What I'm hoping is they might get that one right and that one wrong and that one wrong and that one right. That they'll get some wrong and some right because they've read the material. They should be able to do that. But immediately, as soon as they get through, I then give the question one more time and the answer this time, the question and the answer. And of course, I tell them, focus on the ones that you missed. So if they got 1 right and missed 2 and 3, then I want to be sure that they look at 2 and 3 very carefully. But that idea of about 10 to 15 questions, and then the same 10 or 15 questions with the answer. And then once they did that, I tell them to go back and go through the questions one more time. That's enough. Question, 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 then question and answer, question, answer, question, answer, then go back and do the questions again. I was amazed how often when I would email students and say, well, what's working, what's not working, they come back and say the sequential list of questions is great because it just guides us through the material so carefully that by the time you go back through, you will know that material. So I just love that. And here's actually an example of this, how I did that. I'm not spending time on this, but this is the first 4 questions that I had for some, I guess it was accounts receivable. Question, 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 question. Now, will they get any of them? Yeah, probably. Will they miss some? Oh, sure. But once they go back and read the answers and then come back and do it again, then you're looking for a much improvement. And this requires them to do it. It puts the responsibility on them. You're not simply loading everything on the heads of the students, the head of the teacher, I'm sorry, the head of the teacher. You're putting the responsibility where it should go. It's their education. They should be responsible for that education. And I want to make sure they understand that. And I tell them that in the emails quite frequently. Step 5, you need to practice. I mentioned 3x5 cards. Well, in this program I was building, I did a lot of things by creating videos. And I would create 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 videos per chapter. And I really took a couple of different approaches. Sometimes I would give them an easy question and say, well, here's an easy question. If you want to practice, here it is. Sometimes I would give them a much more complicated question. So let's stretch your knowledge. But almost invariably, I would give them the answer. I would say, okay, we're going to determine bad debt expense. And the answer is $35,000. You work the problem. If you get $35,000, don't waste your time on the video. But if you don't get $35,000, I've got an 8-minute video that'll show you how to get it. And right away, the students, and I like to tell them the length of time because students don't want to waste time. I've mentioned that already. So I would say I've got an 8-minute video. They'll show you how to work this problem, but but don't do it unless you can't get it yourself. And I did some by Panopto, which is inside Blackboard. I did some of the videos on PowerPoint. I like those pretty well. I did some using Zoom. There's all kinds of ways to make videos. I've learned more about making videos just because there's lots of ways to do this. But that was a way they had to have a visual method of getting that material back into their heads or seeing it again. So when you think about it, this is kind of the approach I was using. Guided readings to set the material in their heads. The sequential learning questions to be sure that they could get the questions, so they could pick out the questions and answer the questions, and then the video problems to carry it even further. So if you would give the students, let's say on Monday, you told them to read the guided readings, on Tuesday, you told them to do the sequential learning, on Wednesday, you gave them the video problems. By Wednesday, they pretty much knew what you wanted to know. Now, this was an intro class. This was not intermediate accounting. This was an intro class, but by Wednesday, you could know the material that way. It was a process that actually would work. And that's what I was trying to convince them that it would work. So we also did, and this is what I really wanted to make sure you saw. Remember, I talked about the fact that students, have earbuds in their ears all the time. I wanted to have some auditory learning, and I also wanted to have a chapter overview. So what I did was I would make an audio file, and I tried to make it of about 20 minutes. And what I would do is I would do what I call 3-second questions. And in those 3-second questions, I would give a question. I would pause for 3 seconds so they could stop and come up with the answer, and then I would give them the answer. Question, pause, answer. Question, pause, answer. And I took them in about 20 minutes. I could lead them pretty well through most chapters. And if they took 20 minutes to listen, question, pause, answer, two things are happening there. The first thing is they're using the ears, something that is underused in education. Secondly, it's a way they can overview the whole chapter at one time. Very rarely do we do anything in education where we overview the whole process for that particular chapter at one time. Thirdly, going back to what I said before, students love to multitask. They could simply put these earbuds in, walk around campus, getting some exercise, and going through the chapter at the same time. I always preach to them, use your spare moments, and you can get through this course without getting too tired. So here's an example. The question would be, what kind of account is the allowance for doubtful accounts? And I'd pause 1, 2, 3, and then I would give the answer. The allowance for doubtful accounts, and then blah, 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 and you get that. I had to type those out. I did not do those off the top of my head, I will tell you that. But I sat down for an hour or two and I could type out that 20-minute questions, and I would do them in that case. They were kind of fun. I enjoyed that. Some of these things I enjoyed more than others. Those I enjoyed. I just enjoyed doing the auditory. So if you think about it, we still have to insert the urgency. Now we've got the guided readings. We've got the sequential learning questions. We've got the videos. And now we got the auditory, but you still need some urgency. As much as I kind of hate to put that in, it's necessary. It's human nature. So we gave comprehension quizzes, which are true false quizzes, every 2 to 4 days. And they were very low stakes. But students are interesting. Any stakes will scare them. So we would say, okay, on Wednesday, we're going to do a true false question. And my belief was if they had done what I had asked them to do, then they could answer the questions. I wasn't trying to trick them. I wasn't trying to surprise them. I was trying to say, listen, do what I ask you to do and you'll get the questions correct. And then we would give chapter quizzes about every week. And they were pretty low stakes too. We were just trying to make sure they stuck with us. So every 2 to 4 days, you'd have a comprehension quiz, and that was true and false. Every week or so, you'd have a chapter quiz, and that was multiple choice questions. And then we had hourly exams about every 3 to 4 weeks in this case. I wanted to quiz them a lot. I wanted them to always have that urgency. I wanted as much as possible for those quizzes to be low stakes because I didn't want to scare them too badly. I wanted the questions to be stuff. If they had done the work, they could answer the questions in that case. So if you're thinking about how this sounds, we had a class motto, at least I had. If you do what I ask, you really should make an A. And I really wanted to I wanted to tattoo that onto their hands. If you do what I ask, you really should make an A. I wanted them to believe that in the darkest parts of their heart, that they could do that. Can some of these materials now be used in my life? Of course. I do this now. The hard part is to try to figure out where to put the live stuff. But the basic idea is the guided readings come first to form the foundation. The sequential learning starts building that learning into a sequential form. The video problems give them a review. If they can't work the problems, the audio questions and answers are an overview of everything and allow them to use those ears that they're not learning with. And then the quizzes are to provide urgency. That to me is what we were doing. Is that high quality? Well, it worked pretty darn well, I think. And, I come back to the two questions I've asked you to ponder. First question is online education possible? Is it inferior or can it be high quality? I thought this was pretty high quality. I really did. That was the first thing. The second thing I thought was, or the second question I asked was, if I could do this with 74 people, could I do it with 5,000 people? Now, clearly, I cannot get 5,000 people to start and 5,000 people to finish. But could I get a really good number of people to learn financial statements, FIFO, LIFO, bad debt expense, intangible assets, all of the stuff that's in a financial accounting course? Could I get that to them at a relatively low price? I think that's what this was all about. We need more people to get better educated at a reasonable price. I don't think bad education helps anybody. I think live education is fabulous, but you can only teach about 50 or 75 people at a time, and it has its own problems. I think if you start, and again, I go back and say what I said a while ago. I only wish I was 54 for lots of reasons instead of 74. I think this would be a wonderful way to try to change the world, is to figure out how to educate, how to create really, really, really good online education and change the world by making great online education. I wanted to do this with financial accounting. I just enjoyed it immensely. My name is Joe Hoyle. It's been a fascinating experience to talk with you. You've got my email address. It's jhoyle@richmond.edu. If I can ever provide you with information or anything else, please don't hesitate to contact me. I would love to talk with you about this topic. Education is truly the most wonderful thing we can do for people. Give them a good education. Have a great day.